Well, this year is probably a first for me. This might be the very first time that the Academy Awards were more exciting than Wrestlemania. Thanks, Will Smith. I started this YouTube channel almost 12 years ago, and I dedicated that channel to professional wrestling and giving my thoughts and opinions on it. And for my first WrestleMania season as an active YouTuber, we were heading into WrestleMania 27 at the time. I cannot believe it has been that long that I've been on YouTube, but I did a series of videos called Rebooking WrestleMania, which you can still check out here on the channel. I do not recommend it because I'm sure they are of terrible quality. My camera back then was awful, and I'm sure my microphone was even worse. But I'm the type of guy, it's like once I produce something, I do not go back and rewatch it. And those are ones I have not rewatched, but they were the first real series of videos that I did on this channel. Is kind of like an ongoing analysis of things that the WWE got wrong in their booking of certain WrestleManias, and I was kind of fixing those situations to create the best matches and situations possible in those particular instances. And I've decided to kind of revisit that concept a little bit, not entirely, and talk about WrestleMania 18, the 2002 version of the event, and the event that marked the 1 year, or close to the 1 year anniversary of the closure of WCW and the end of the Monday Night Wars. I've said it before, I've said it many times on this channel over the years, 12 years straight. I have been unwavering in this opinion. The worst thing that ever happened to professional wrestling was the end of WCW. And you can see it from the declining quality of the WWE to the lack of places to go for the other talents and wrestlers. By losing WCW, the business as a whole lost a lot. But with the sale of WCW to Vince McMahon, it did create, in the short term, some excitement among wrestling fans, because now we were going to get all the dream matches. All the dream matches that we ever wanted out of the Monday Night Wars period, we were finally going to get them, and it was going to be amazing. That did not happen for many reasons. They couldn't get many of the WCW talents. And when I say the WCW talents, I mean the key top-level WCW superstars that made the Monday Night Wars special, that made Monday Nitro the can't-miss show that beat Raw for 83 straight weeks. They didn't get many of those guys. The only ones they really got that were kind of on that level were Diamond Dallas Page, and to a lesser extent Booker T, who was a well-respected talent, but he was also the guy that was world champion when WCW was a sinking ship that was waiting for everything to be completely submerged underwater. I think if you were going to track Booker T's greatest run during the hot years of WCW, that was as a member of Harlem Heat and then his run as television champion. He was not one of the major main event stars when WCW was really, really red hot. And what the invasion angle was lacking were the big stars, like I said. Like, they couldn't get Goldberg. They couldn't get the NWO. They couldn't get Ric Flair. Ric Flair actually showed up the night after the invasion was over, which was so frustrating. They didn't get Sting. Couldn't get Sting. And many of the names that truly made Monday Nitro special, and really, if you're going to book an invasion angle or a WWF versus WCW war, cross-promotional war, you want those big stars. You want Goldberg and Sting and the NWO and Ric Flair. And on the other side, the WWF side, you want Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, The Undertaker, Mick Foley. And when they did the invasion angle, not only could they not really get any of the big WCW named stars, but even a lot of their own stars were hurt. Chris Benoit went down. The biggest one of all, Triple H, went down. So you got an entire WWF, WCW storyline without Triple H, who was one of the key heels, the top wrestling heel of the time period. And, I mean, Vince McMahon was the top heel overall, top heel character, but as far as wrestling goes, Triple H was the top wrestling heel. And he was also one of the cornerstones and the key members and even the second leader of D-Generation X, one of the most famous things to come out of the Attitude Era. So the whole thing just could never live up to the lofty expectations that a lot of us fans at the time had for it. And some of it, I feel, I understand why they were limited in things they could do. Other things were definitely avoidable and they didn't have to do. Putting putting Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mr. Raw Attitude WWF, who hated WCW when he was there because of what they did to him. Having him as the top heel in the WCW faction was absolutely ridiculous and completely killed the identity of the opposing faction, which by the time it was over, it didn't feel like WCW or even ECW when they worked that in. It felt like WWF versus evil WWF, and that was it. That's really all there was to it. It didn't have, it didn't capture the right feel and emotion. I'm not saying that good matches didn't happen during that time period. I mean, you look at some of the Angle Austin matches, those were great. You look at some of the Rob Van Dam, Jeff Hardy matches, those were great. And Rob Van Dam got over as a superstar during that time. So some good did come out of it, but it just did not live up to our imaginations. And to be fair, as I'm going to demonstrate in this video, it probably couldn't live up to our imaginations. It was we built it up in our minds for so long and for so many years that there was probably no way the WWF, WWE now, could ever execute it in a completely 100% satisfying way that completely checked all the boxes that we all expected to see. So what I'm going to be doing in this special rebooking WrestleMania return is I'm going to rebook WrestleMania 18 to reflect the ultimate WWF versus WCW card to signify the absolute final end of the Monday Night Wars. This was going to be the big showdown between both companies, and we were going to get all the big matchups and pay off all the big storylines along the way. Now, in this rebooking, and this is where it deviates from rebooking WrestleMania, but when I did rebooking WrestleMania, almost a dozen years ago, that was done with the understanding that the situations I was covering were ones that could absolutely be possible. Like, I was looking at those situations like, look, they could have done this, they could have done that, they could have done this, and it was absolutely within their power to do all of those things. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen, and they had some boo-boos at WrestleMania because of it. Here I'm taking a different approach. My fantasy card for WWF and WCW is completely unrealistic. It's not possible and completely within the realm of fantasy, and most importantly, it was created from the standpoint with the understanding that to achieve this card, money is no object, and everybody is available. So again, completely impossible based on the circumstances of the time period, whose contracts were available financially. It just, none of it was, the card I'm about to present to you is actually impossible in so many ways. But this is a fantasy card, and the purpose of this is to not kind of throw fuel to the fire of the disappointment that many of us wrestling fans felt in 2001 when this angle didn't turn out as well as we'd hoped. But it's to add to the idea that maybe this thing was never going to live up anyway because our imaginations, it was never going to be as good as what we had imagined it to be. And through this card, this fantasy card, what I'm going to do is highlight just how far our imaginations were going at the time. And all of these matches that I booked for this WrestleMania are matches that pulled directly from that time period and I feel utilized the talents in the best possible way. And I had a lot of fun doing it. I had a lot of fun cooking up all these matches and getting all the right guys on there and being sure to include all the guys that absolutely deserve to be included. And it even led me to a point, because now, and again, this is where I'm going to how impossible my fantasy card is. WrestleMania now is a 2-night event. It was 2 nights at 36, 37, and it's going to be at 38 later this week. And I've decided to apply that to WrestleMania 18 and make it a 2-night event. and it's kind of a combination of what we see from modern WrestleManias now, and also what we saw way back at WrestleMania 2. Instead of WrestleMania 2 was held at 3 venues across 3 different cities, all across the United States, all in one night. A huge undertaking that I'm sure was a pain in the ass to produce. And here I'm kind of taking a similar approach, but instead it's going to be a 2-night event held at 2 different locations on 2 different venues in 2 different parts of North America. Now, night 1 is going to be held in a traditional WCW style venue, and I even have the idea of having the WrestleMania set for this venue designed to look like Monday Nitro, because we can talk about all the pay-per-views, and I thought WCW had some great sets for their pay-per-views. When you look at Halloween Havoc, Bash at the Beach, great. I wish WWE would pull more from their playbook in terms of making their modern sets look really, really cool and unique and making the shows stand out more. But when I think WCW, I think of that classic WCW Monday Nitro set. So I think I would take this night 1 as an opportunity to kind of be, not just be like kind of the final WCW pay-per-view, but also be like the final time you get to see the true Monday Nitro set. And the old Monday Nitro set, not the one that they redesigned with the new logo that looked like a hood ornament. I mean like the actual classic WCW Nitro set. And my venue would be the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. That was a classic venue for them. They held many pay-per-views there, several pay-per-views, including a couple of Halloween Havocs. It was a big, important venue in WCW's history, and I feel like that would be a perfect staging ground for a WCW-style WrestleMania event. And then night 2 would be held in a traditional WrestleMania event, which would be the large stadium, which of course is the Toronto Sky Dome, the staging place of WrestleMania 6, and the place where WrestleMania 18 was held, ultimately. So I see no reason to change that for night 2, and there is a kind of escalation from night 1 to night 2, where night 1 you get the WCW event, which is in a big, important venue, but then you go to the large stadium for night 2, and that raises the stakes, at least from a production standpoint, and makes the second night show feel bigger. It makes it feel like things are getting bigger and things are getting more intense, kind of creating that perception as the 2-night process goes along, because 2-night shows are very difficult. And now that my long-winded intro is out of the way, let's get into the card itself. Like I said, it's night 1, MGM Grand Las Vegas. WCW has their classic Monday Nitro set out the works, and it's night 1 of WrestleMania 18 in a traditional WCW setting. And on commentator, I have Tony Schiavone, Mike Tenay, and Larry Zbyszko, the classic Nitro commentators, with Bobby the Brain Heenan and Mean Gene Okerlund doing guest spots throughout night 1 and night 2, because I love Mean Gene and Bobby, and they're the best, and they deserve to work more because they're great. And I love them. So, getting into the actual card itself, the first match I have, opening bout, is one that is perfectly in line with WCW, and that is a unification match for the WWF Light Heavyweight Championship and the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. And that is between what I felt was WWF's best light heavyweight at the time, the Japanese buzzsaw Tajiri, and WCW's most famous cruiserweight of all time, Rey Mysterio Jr. Now, the Cruiserweight division in WCW was very important to that brand's identity, especially during the Monday Night Wars period. It allowed them to present a different style of wrestling that was not being offered on the other show. And it was one of the contributing factors to making WCW as exciting as it was. Yes, the NWO was a main angle, and yes, you had Sting, and yes, you had Goldberg, but the Cruiserweights filled out the cards beautifully and provided some very exciting action. And while the light heavyweight division over in the WWF was never quite as good and never as well handled, despite those shortcomings, Tajiri did manage to get over as a light heavyweight star, and at that time was kind of the best light heavyweight in the company by default. Gimmicks like the Mist and the Tarantula all got over with the audience, and I think having Tajiri go up against the king of the cruiserweights as far as WCW is concerned, Rey Mysterio Jr. would be an ideal matchup between two very talented superstars. And again, when you're putting together a show, you want to start off hot. You want to do a hot match that'll get the crowd going and provide some great action. Rey Mysterio has been very good at that in his career when you look at his matches with Dean Malenko and his famous SummerSlam match with Kurt Angle from 2002. I think Rey and Tajiri, they would ultimately go on to have matches in the WWF. I can't recall any specific ones off the top of my head, but they were fixtures of the cruiserweight division moving forward in those early years of the Ruthless Aggression / brand extension era. And I think if you're going to do a WWF versus WCW show, the cruiserweights have to be featured in some capacity. And part of the goal of this show is to also unify all the belts and kind of put put all the debates to rest. It's like, all right, who are the best champions when you match them up together? And I think this is an ideal match to have, and I think is a great way to show off the talents of both men. And for me, I have Rey Mysterio going over. Like I said, he is the king of the cruiserweights. And while Tajiri did get over in WWF, it was never to the extent that Rey Mysterio did in WCW, and then eventually again in WWE, because Rey Mysterio is something special. And I personally feel like in this situation, Rey Mysterio, in the WCW portion of the show, in the opening match, representing the entirety of a very special division that helped give WCW its identity, Rey Mysterio Jr. should absolutely go over. And next up, we're going to bring a little bit of hardcore action to the show, and it's going to feature some very key factions that existed during the Monday Night Wars period. The Radicals, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko, 4 men that were staples of WCW programming for most of the Monday Night Wars, and then shockingly jumped ship to the WWF in early January 2000, right after Chris Benoit won the WCW title. So if there was any indication that who was going to win the war at that point, it's like, dude, even the mid-carders are jumping ship from WCW. That's where they are right now. But the Radicals, that faction, filled out the WWF's roster in 2000 very nicely, and also have a history with WCW. And I thought about how to use them, how should they be utilized, because they definitely needed to play a part on the show. And my original idea was to have them defect back to WCW. But then I started thinking about it. There was another faction in WCW that has a history with Chris Benoit and with Perry Saturn, and that's Raven and his flock. Now, Raven and the flock was probably the coolest stable of all time that never got a big win. They got over, they existed, and apparently Eric Bischoff is the only one who didn't understand it. It's like, dude, everyone liked the flock. And there were indicators of a very strong faction centered around a very strong character in Raven. I remember on my recent rewatch of the early Nitros, when you get to that point where Raven hasn't even had his first match yet, and he has a stare down with Randy Savage, you believe that Raven could go toe-to-toe with Randy Savage. That's how strong the character was. And I felt like they left a lot of money on the table in regards to Raven. Now, Raven ultimately went to WWF himself and kind of floundered, didn't really do anything. But once WCW was purchased, that created an opportunity for me to recreate the flock. And it's, Raven does great as the cult leader style of stable master. And I saw a great opportunity to reinvigorate the flock, bring back that famous WCW concept, and have them go to war with Raven's old rivals, Chris Benoit, who feuded with him over the United States Championship, along with Diamond Dallas Page, and Perry Saturn, a former member of the flock who fought out of Raven's influence. And in determining members for this new flock, I thought about some of the talented guys that were there. Obviously, Billy Kidman went on to become a big cruiserweight star, got his start in the flock, and I couldn't really find a place for Billy Kidman anywhere else, so I figured I would have him re-debut on WWF programming as a member of Raven's new flock. And other members I came up with are 2 very talented, underrated superstars. One of my personal favorites, Mike Awesome, a big guy that could throw you around and also fly like a cruiserweight. Excellent talent that never got his just due and is unfortunately no longer with us. And the innovator of offense, Chris Kanyon, who also had a tragic end. You don't believe me, watch the episode of Dark Side of the Ring. But Chris Kanyon was a staple of WCW programming and was a solid hand all around and a very talented guy. And I think Raven having stronger talents around him, because the flock was really, it was Raven, Saturn, Kidman, and then kind of, you had Reese, who was the muscle, and you had Sick Boy and Lodi, who were kind of just the fall guys, and not really great threats, enhanced by the fact that they always jobbed the flock out. So here I'm seeing an opportunity. Let's have Raven recruit more threatening, more talented guys. like Mike Awesome and like Chris Kanyon, and that creates a more powerful version of the Flock. One of my original ideas when I was putting this card together was to do maybe the Flock versus the Brood, because I felt like the Brood could or should have been WWF's version of Raven and his Flock, but I don't think Gangrel was ever as good on the mic, and that may have restrained him. He was nowhere near as good as Raven on the mic, and that was Raven's major selling point beyond anything else. So I don't think, and Edge and Christian went on to do much better things, and I have much different plans for Edge and Christian. So that whole Flock versus Brood idea didn't materialize, but Radicals versus New Flock, I think that could be very interesting and exciting, especially when you take into account how talented Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn are. Perry Saturn, very underrated worker. I always loved watching him go. Had some of Goldberg's best matches in Goldberg's early run. And you put it together with crazy hardcore types like Raven and Mike Awesome and Billy Kidman, who can do all this high-flying stuff, and Chris Kanyon, who can come up with all these crazy things to do. I think you would have a very fun, very exciting match. And a battle, a hardcore battle. I would make this a Ravens Rules match, which would also necessitate tornado tag, anything goes. They just go around all over the place and be their crazy selves. And Chris Benoit proved during his matches with Kevin Sullivan that he could get pretty hardcore and wild as well. So I say let all 8 men go out there, cut loose, and put on a hell of a match. And in this one, I have the returning WCW superstars Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko, and Perry Saturn ultimately getting the win over Raven and his Flock. Now, I just pontificated about how Raven and the Flock never got a big win, and here I have them losing on the big WCW versus WWF show, but presumably in my booking, the Flock would have gotten a bunch of wins leading up to that. And so this would kind of be them suffering the final defeat at the end of the storyline. Next match, the women are going to be featured. It's another unification match as Trish Stratus, who at this point was just starting to fully transition out of being a manager or valet and into being a full-time wrestler. And so she was still kind of in her early development stages as that. And you look at where she is at WrestleMania 18 and where she is at WrestleMania 19, the matches she would have with Jazz and Victoria, much different talent. So she was still developing at this point. But even though Trish was still in her early growing stages here, I feel like a match with former WWF Women's Champion Medusa is too good to pass up. And you would have Medusa come in, presumably Trish would win the title, and then Medusa would come in holding a garbage can, and then she pulls the old WWF Women's Championship out of the trash can. There was also a WCW Women's Championship. I also considered possibly reintroducing Medusa as the WCW Women's Champion. Or maybe, now that I'm thinking out loud about this, take the old WWF Women's title belt that she threw in the trash can and rechristen it as the new WCW Women's Championship. And then it's Trish versus Medusa in the unification match at WrestleMania. And it's an excuse to get the women on the show and to showcase, honestly, it's to showcase Medusa, who I think is a great talent, very tough, hard-nosed worker that, I mean, if you've seen her matches with Bull Nakano or Luna Vachon, very, very strong talent that didn't always get her due. I think she was almost too good for her era, and what I mean by that, she was a really good worker in an era where women's wrestling just wasn't that big of an attraction. If you had Medusa in today's environment, oh my God, she could have a blast working with like the Becky Lynch's and Charlotte Flairs in main events, and I think she'd do really well. I think, and I also think she could legitimately beat half of them to death, probably even today. I don't know, but here I'm thinking it's a kind of a proving ground for Trish, so hopefully she would get a nice showing in the process. But in my world, Medusa, the one who betrayed the WWF, threw the belt in the garbage can, ultimately walks out with both belts and becomes a killer of the unified women's division moving forward and the unbeatable champion that would have to be toppled down the road, possibly facing girls like Lita or Ivory or maybe Trish again. Molly Holly's another potential one. I'm not saying that this match at this time would have been the best in the world because, again, like I said, Trish was still developing, but I think it would have been an important stepping stone for her into developing her into the world-class Hall of Fame talent that she would ultimately become, because you'd be putting her in the ring with a world-class Hall of Fame talent. So I think this would be a cool match to have. And we have another unification match up next, a battle of the European roughnecks, brawlers, stretch experts. I don't know what you want to call them, but this next match, William Regal, the WWF European Champion, taking on WCW Television Champion Fit Finlay, the Belfast Brawler. And this would be a unification match between the third-tier championships. And again, this could be a really cool match. Back in his Lord Steven Regal days, Lord Steven Regal was one of the best television champions that WCW ever had. I remember his feud with Larry Zbyszko like it was yesterday. So he has a history with that other championship, in addition to being kind of a de facto option for European champion because of his heritage. So when he came to the WWF, it was a natural to put the European title on him. And he held that a couple of times. And Fit Finlay, also European-born, would be interested in going for the European title as well. So it's like I'm picking guys that have histories and potential interest towards these particular championships. Fit Finlay was also the one that was involved in the situation with Booker T and Chris Benoit over the television championship and was a big figure in that. But one reason I booked this match is that Regal and Finlay had a match on one of the early Nitros that was an awesome brawl. Like, these two guys, like, their stuff looks good. I mean, they really lay into each other when they go at it. And I think this would have been a, we have the hardcore matches on the show, and we have the flashy, high-flying matches, but this is a chance to have, like, a nice, down and dirty, old-school wrestling match of two guys that can just slap and knock and beat the crap out of each other. I think it would be a lot of fun to watch. And again, because it's in the WCW venue, I'm leaning more on the WCW side of things. So I have Fit Finlay winning both championships here and becoming the unified European/television champion. And by the way, in situations like this where it's like two different titles with different names, my thought process is that the champion that wins is the one that gets to keep the name of the unified belt, meaning so if the television champion beats the European champion and they unify the belts, then the unified championship is the unified television championship. So that's along my line of thinking of what I would do with it. But I mean, this isn't a huge dream match or anything because we've seen this match before, but it's just one that when I was looking for options to fill out the card and do something a little unique, I was like, this could be a fun one to have, like a very nice, solid, stiff undercard match between two veterans that know how to do that. Now, when people talk about dream matches between WWF and WCW, I don't hear a whole lot of tag team dream matches get brought up, and I want the tag team division to be represented, damn it, because the tag teams were a very important part of the Monday Night Wars when you look at the New Age Outlaws, the Hardy Boys, the Dudley Boys, Edge and Christian, and that was just on the WWF side of things. And then you look at WCW, Outsiders, Harlem Heat, Wrath and Mortis, who I really like, the Faces of Fear, the Steiner Brothers. A lot of hard-nosed, heavy-hitting tag teams that I was, when I did my Nitro rewatch, I commented, it's like, man, these tag teams beat the shit out of each other. I love it. It's great. So I wanted the tag team division to be represented on this card. And what better tag teams to have a nice, good old-fashioned brawl than the Dudley Boys, the Masters of the Table match, and Harlem Heat. Underrated tag team. I feel Harlem Heat is one of the coolest tag teams in WCW's history. One of the best tag teams of the 90s. As for me, it's when it comes to WCW, it's them and the Steiner Brothers as my favorites. To me, Harlem Heat, I felt the same way about them that I felt about Demolition when I was a young kid. I thought, man, these guys just look cool and they beat the hell out of people. And I just loved them. I couldn't get enough of Harlem Heat, especially when Sherry was their manager. I always loved and appreciated Sherry Martel. And presumably this storyline, at least in my head, will be built around Sherry Martel returning as their manager and leading Harlem Heat in this war against the Dudley Boys, who are trying to put Sherry through a table because that was their MO at the time. We got to put all of the women through tables because it gives Bubba wood. And I won't elaborate getting more graphic than that. That's just how it was. So I think if you put these two tag teams in a tables match, the Dudley Boys signature match, I think they could have a nice, awesome, wild, stiff brawl. It wouldn't be like the Hardy Boy Dudley table match from Royal Rumble 2000, which was more of a high-flying affair. This one would be a straight-up brawl of just four roughneck motherfuckers just beating the crap out of each other and slamming each other through tables, and I think it would be great. And in my booking, again, I'm leaning towards WCW on night one is kind of where my thought process is going. and I would give the win here to Harlem Heat, although at some point in the match or maybe in the post-match, the Dudleys would put Sherry through the table just to kind of complete that story, which was normal for the Dudleys at this time. I remember when they feuded with TNA and they lost the pay-per-view match. And when I say TNA, I mean Test and Albert, that tag team. And they wanted to put Trish through a table. So even though they lost the match, they still put Trish through a table. They lost a match to Road Dogg and X-Pac where they wanted to put Tori through a table. They lost the match, but they still put Tori through the table. So I'm kind of continuing that trend here where, yeah, the Dudley Boyz are going to lose, but ultimately they get the last laugh because they're going to put Sherry through the table at some point. So that is my booking of this match. But yeah, absolutely. Booker T, Stevie Ray, they get the win here in what is amounting to basically the final WCW event. And now here I'm thinking we need some fluff. We need a break from the action, and we need to kind of like give an unofficial intermission in the middle of the show. Something that I believe in as far as wrestling pay-per-views go. I think that too much effort is put on the in-ring action, and every match needs to try and be the best match in the world. I'm like, dude, sometimes you need a break from the action. And I thought of a way to do that while also featuring some of the key talents that deserve to be featured. So I came up with a dance contest between the trio of Rikishi and Too Cool, who were known to WWF audiences for their dancing, and WCW dance troupe, the Nitro Girls, who were exclusively known for dancing around commercial breaks and throughout all of Monday Nitro, and they were a staple of Nitro programming, so much so that I felt they were very important to the show, and I wanted to have them featured in some capacity. And so I felt like the Nitro Girls deserved that. And Rikishi and Too Cool deserve it because they were over. So I came up with a dance contest where they would each do their routine and the fans would decide who ultimately wins. In my mind, I can't imagine, even if in a traditional WWF venue, it's like, all right, are you going to cheer for Rikishi and Too Cool dancing more? Or are you going to cheer for the sexy ladies like the Kimberly Pages and the Whispers and Che and Spice and Fire and all those other ones doing a nice, sexy dance routine? Which one are you going to vote for? It's like, I would go with the Nitro Girls personally in a heartbeat. So, but regardless of who wins, I have an idea where WCW undercard talents known for their dancing, Disco Inferno and Alex Wright, come out and interrupt the contest and try to say that we're the true best dancers in all of wrestling, which leads to Too Cool and Rikishi beating them up and giving Disco the stink face, and then Rikishi, Too Cool, and the Nitro Girls do a big dance together to kind of close out the segment and make people feel good. So yeah, this is designed entirely as fluff, entirely as an excuse to get people on the show that I feel should be on the show, and provide a nice little bit of lighthearted fun before we get into the two main events of the show. Next up, we have one of the big ones. This is one of the big dream matches that everybody wants, people still want to this day. The Phenom versus the Legend, The Undertaker versus Sting. Now, here I have a whole storyline cooked up of how you could get these two together. But in my mind, there's no pairing that quite represents WWF versus WCW more than this one, because Undertaker was the standard bearer of the WWF for so many years. I mean, he was their top gimmick, their top creation. And even when he wasn't the world champion, and most of the time he wasn't, and he wasn't the top guy, he was like their star attraction. And he was this big source of consistency because he was just always there. And over time, the legend of The Undertaker just grew and grew and grew. And Sting has a similar standing in WCW where he was their big star, big main eventer, world champion. But he was the guy, the big hero that was there for year after year after year, and then ultimately developed into his own character full of mystique, the Crow gimmick that feuded with Hollywood Hogan heading into Starrcade 97. And my idea for this storyline is that Undertaker and Sting would have a match prior to WrestleMania, months prior, where Sting would ultimately win. Now keep in mind, this is the point where The Undertaker is the American badass. And he's still doing the biker gimmick. And Sting challenges The Undertaker knowing that it's the ultimate challenge that he's always wanted. But something's missing. And he's trying to draw what he feels is the ideal challenge from The Undertaker. The American badass Undertaker is not the Undertaker that he wants to face. He wants to face the Dead Man, the Phenom, the Grim Reaper, that Undertaker. That's the one that Sting wants. And I even considered a scenario where Undertaker and Sting are set to have a match, and Sting refuses to get into the ring because it's not the Undertaker that he wants to face. And these are ideas that are kind of kicking around in my head. But anyway, they have a pay-per-view encounter ultimately at some point, and Sting wins and leaves Undertaker laying. It's possibly even like they could even do a situation like maybe a buried alive or a casket type of thing where the Undertaker gets buried or killed off. And then that starts the path to getting the dead man Undertaker back. And again, if this sounds familiar, it's very similar to what ultimately was the return of the dead man at WrestleMania 20 and Undertaker's revisited feud with Kane. But I'm kind of thinking along the same lines here because you want to see Undertaker and Sting. I mean, that's a match you definitely want to see. But you don't want it to be the American Badass Undertaker. You want the dead man Undertaker for this match, especially if it's going to be Crow Sting. That's what you want. And I think gearing the story in a way where Sting is trying to get the best Undertaker to come forward would be ideal. And in the weeks and months leading up to this match, you don't see Undertaker on TV. They just show vignettes, they show promos, and they make the match official. And the mind games and all the light tricks and the lightning and the fire and all this other stuff starts toying with Sting, who's a guy that's used to playing mind games with people by pointing the baseball bat, standing in the rafters, rappelling down from the ceiling, and all sorts of things. And it comes down to WrestleMania Night 1. The big showdown's going to happen. Undertaker versus Sting. Sting rappels down from the rafters, as was normal for him, part of what made him famous. And then Undertaker rises up from the stage or some other like fancy Undertaker entrance. And he's in the full dead man getup. He can even have Paul Bearer back at this point. They could even use Paul Bearer in the promos to kind of lead into this, where Paul Bearer's like, I know how to bring the real Undertaker back, and all that other stuff. And they do the match. And, it's one of those matches where my imagination kind of runs wild because I'm picturing, like, the sight of Sting hitting the Stinger Splash on The Undertaker is one of the coolest visuals I just can't get out of my mind. I could see, like, Sting hitting the Scorpion Death Drop and then Undertaker sitting up. I could see Undertaker doing a choke slam and Sting, like, immediately standing up and no-selling it and all sorts of things. They could do the Sting Army bit, and they could have the Sting Army with all the fake Stings battle the Druids. They could even do that, like something crazy like that, where you just have all these fake Stings and all these Druids fighting around the arena. They could start like playing with the lights and have Undertaker teleport all over the arena. Like they could do all sorts of crazy shit with this. I think it would be, I think physically Undertaker and Sting are capable of a lot, especially at this point in 2002. But I also think when you have two characters that are as theatrical as this, you have to take advantage of that and be a little crazy and be a little over the top. And I would like to see a lot of that in this match as well. So, Undertaker versus Sting. And here, this is really the only big loss for WCW on this card. You can't have the Dead Man come in on his first night and lose. Dead Man gets the win on this card in what is sure to be a wild spectacle, at least in my imagination. And it ends with the two legends respecting each other and not shaking hands because that would be stupid. But Sting like holding his bat up in some sort of salute to Undertaker or something that's like, all right, I got what I wanted out of this. And Undertaker's back and you got the big dream match out of it. It should be fun for everybody. And now we have another non-wrestling segment as kind of a buffer before the main event. But one of the major happenings during the Monday Night Wars was the Montreal Screwjob and Bret Hart's transitioning from WWF to WCW, which was not very successful for him, as has been well documented. And I also wanted to work Roddy Piper onto the show. Roddy Piper was a major figure during the Monday Night Wars, one of the big acquisitions from WCW, and had that blockbuster feud with Hogan. Say what you want about the matches themselves, but the matches drew, and they drew pretty big, and created some great promos on TV as well. So I think Piper should be included in this, absolutely. So my idea was to do a Piper's Pit segment, the return of Piper's Pit, as Roddy Piper mediates between Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff, and Bret the Hitman Hart, as Bret gets to finally get everything off of his chest and tell Vince what he thinks of him and tell Bischoff what he thinks of him. And during the course of the segment, you can see Vince and Eric like take barbs at each other because I have another idea for them on night 2 that I'll get into later. So they can build into that match moving forward. but also like close the book on that Bret Hart story where he finally gets his revenge on Vince, and finally puts Eric Bischoff in his place and puts them both in the sharpshooter. And Piper, who's going to be mediating this whole thing, Piper could also like help out with that because it's like he doesn't like Vince, he doesn't like Bischoff either, so he'll probably like take a shot. Or like I could picture like a situation where Bret like punches Vince, takes him down and puts him in the sharpshooter, and then Eric Bischoff just starts laughing. And then Bret like releases the sharpshooter after a really long time and then stares Bischoff down. And then he tries to run, but then Piper holds on to him and takes a shot. And then that sets up Bischoff to be put into the sharpshooter by Bret Hart. And kind of close the book on Bret Hart and his time with both WWF and WCW, and giving him kind of a big closure for the sour feelings coming out of his runs in both companies. And finally, we have the main event tonight one, the big match. And what is the big gimmick match in WCW's history? It's War Games. And when you got War Games, yeah, I mean, you can't have a WCW card, like a dream WCW card, without War Games being factored in some way, shape, or form. But when you got War Games, you got to have teams. So I'm thinking, all right, what are the two major factions during the Monday Night Wars that were kind of iconic, sold a lot of merch, drew comparisons to each other, and are constantly compared to one another? D-Generation X for the WWF, and the one that changed it all, the one that I'm a huge fan of, and still to this day a huge mark for, the NWO. And you work these two factions together, and you take advantage of the fact that members of DX and members of the NWO were friends. And again, in my kind of imagination for this storyline, the NWO comes into the WWF after WCW was purchased and try to like basically raise hell like they've always done and run things the way they want to be run. And Kevin Nash and Scott Hall reach out to their friend Triple H. It's like, look, join us. We're the clique, basically. But Triple H doesn't get along with Hogan, and is like, no, I'm not joining a faction with that red and yellow motherfucker. I ain't doing that. And ultimately, things come to a blow, and the NWO beats the holy hell out of Triple H. And Triple H tries to get a friend to help him in the form of X-Pac. They do a tag match, Triple H and X-Pac versus the Outsiders. I think I just spoiled it for myself. And during that tag match, Six-Pac reveals himself to be a member of the NWO. He chooses the NWO over DX, readopts the name Six-Pac, and then more members of the NWO eventually join the group, namely Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. Holla if you hear me. I'm a huge Scott Steiner mark, and I definitely wanted to work him onto the show. He's one of the last WCW World Champions and was their best heel during the dying days of the company. And I feel he definitely deserves to be worked onto the show, especially since he was like an iconic member of the NWO. And also the Big Show, who came to the WWF and stays on the WWF faction until the NWO rolls around. And granted, there's the issues with Nash, and I'd have to find a way to resolve that, because Nash did almost kill him with a jackknife powerbomb, but I wanted to get the big giant on the NWO faction and provide an additional threat for DX. So Triple H is left feuding with the NWO, and he's got to get some people that he can trust, and he basically reforms D-Generation X. He reaches out to China, brings China involved, and now China was known for the intergender matches and being a star-studded attraction. She was gone from the WWF at this point for reasons that have been well documented, and I won't go into them any further, but I think that China could believably be entered into the DX team in a War Games match. So China joins up with Triple H, and the New Age Outlaws, who had broken up by this point due to an injury from Billy Gunn, and Road Dogg was, I think, gone from the company at this point. But, again, this is fantasy booking, and everybody's available, and that's what I'm doing. So, the New Age Outlaws reform and join D-Generation X, but they need one more guy. They need one more guy to make it 5-on-5 for War Games. Who do you get? You get HBK Shawn Michaels, who did return to the ring in 2002, so he would have been in good shape at this point. And this War Games match, it's the 2-ring setup, the classic War Games style. I would keep that same thing. And I think having it as the main event at night 2 prevents... Because I think having the 2-ring setup, it's great for War Games, but for all the other matches, it could be potentially a little awkward. So I think having it as the main event of night 1 allows for at least an entire card where there's not 2 rings in there. And I don't think it would hurt too many matches, especially like Undertaker and Sting. Like it almost adds an extra dimension to that match because like again, I want to throw as many bells and whistles into that match as possible. But you got the War Games match. Shawn Michaels returns to the ring, returns to WrestleMania, and helps his team, helps D-Generation X, the faction that he helped create, go up against the NWO in a 5-on-5 War Games war that will be bloody, violent, and crazy. And it's like, man, I look at all the talent here. It's like, man, you really do realize like how much talent there really was. I mean, we've got Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Six-Pac, Scott Steiner, Chyna, New Age Outlaws, and The Big Show, Giant, former WCW champion. And I haven't even like scratched the surface yet of all the talents that were around and all the big stars that were around during this time. It really speaks to how great the era really was. And looking at this, my imagination's running wild, and what I have pictured for a finish is that Scott Hall and Six-Pac ultimately like escape the double cage somehow, and Triple H and Shawn Michaels follow them up there. And they have a big brawl on top of the cage, a la Hell in a Cell, like Shawn's classic match with Undertaker. And they ultimately basically demolish Scott Hall and Six-Pac while on top of the War Games match, but the War Games structure, but it leaves Chyna and the New Age Outlaws alone in the double cage with two giants and angry as fuck Scott Steiner. So while Triple H and Shawn Michaels dominate on top of the cage, the giants and angry Scott are basically running roughshod over the New Age Outlaws in Chyna, and Scott Steiner, the master of the Steiner Recliner, locks in the Steiner Recliner on one of the Outlaws and gets the submission victory, securing the win for the NWO, and also setting the stage for a potential DX split down the road between Triple H and Shawn Michaels, and creating their epic feud that would happen in 2002 anyway. But this is kind of, the purpose of this match is to create like a launch point for a Triple H Shawn Michaels match down the road, while also giving us the DX NWO match that a lot of people were clamoring for. All right, night one is concluded, and now let's move to the Toronto Skydome in night two with commentators, the voices of the WWF Attitude Era, Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler. Total no-brainer there. There was going to be no other choice. Although, like night one, I would probably have Bobby Heenan and Mean Gene Okerlund running around, doing backstage interviews and making guest spots here and there just for fun, because I love Bobby the Brain Heenan and Mean Gene Okerlund. But getting into the large stadium, the large crowd, we have our card, full card of dream matches and the final WWF versus WCW encounter. So let's get right into it. First match, opening bout, another unification match for the Intercontinental and United States Championships. Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle with the Intercontinental Championship taking on Mr. Perfect himself, Curt Hennig, who would be holding the United States Championship. Now, some might see the Intercontinental title as a demotion for Kurt Angle, but it is a title that he has a history with. He did win it very early into his run in the WWF. And Curt Hennig is arguably the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. He's one of my personal favorites, and he's a guy who carried the belt so well that I kind of viewed the Intercontinental title as being Curt Hennig's, Mr. Perfect's belt. And he's also a former United States champion. So, and Kurt Angle, Olympic gold medalist, won an Olympic gold medal for the USA, would be interested in holding the United States Championship. So again, kind of like the European and TV title, I'm playing with both men's histories and their wants and desires in creating this unification match and how they relate to both championships. Now, I thought about doing Kurt Angle versus Bret Hart for this one, but I really, really leaned on Bret Hart needing closure with Vince and that whole thing. So I put him in the Piper's Pit segment as kind of my one concession of an injury, where it's like Bret was injured and done at that point. So I didn't really give too much consideration to putting Bret in a match. But the next best thing would be a technical wizard like a Curt Hennig, who was an amazing worker, amazing wrestler, very celebrated as one of the all-time greatest technical guys in the business. So you put him in there with Kurt Angle, they're probably going to make some magic. I have Kurt Angle winning both belts. Easy choice, obvious choice. Curt Hennig, despite still being in really good shape at this point, was the aging star, and Kurt Angle was one of their top guys at this point. So I felt like in this situation, I feel like Kurt Angle would have to be the one that would go over and win both titles. But it should be a great showcase for the technical abilities of both men, and that's what I wanted to do with this. This next match is largely filler and also an excuse to cram a bunch of people onto the card, and a bunch of people that I wanted to include but couldn't quite find a spot for, so I decided on a 21-man battle royal, 7 members of the WWF, 7 members of WCW, and 7 members of the NWO to create a 21-man battle royal to get kind of the stars that, again, I wanted to include them, but I couldn't quite find a spot for them anywhere else on the card. So for the WCW side of things, I was thinking along the lines of obviously Lex Luger, obviously big Steiner brother fan, got to get Rick Steiner on there. Hacksaw Jim Duggan I thought about including in there. I also thought this would be a good spot for Vader. Even though he was not with WCW or WWF at this point, this would be a nice one-off for Vader to include him as kind of a member of the WCW team. And even though he did not play a role in the Monday Night Wars for WCW, he is such an integral figure of WCW's history that I feel a responsibility to include Vader in some capacity. And for the NWO side of things, obviously Buff Bagwell needs to be in there, that shit-eating grin of his. Conan would be in there. I was also thinking along the lines of including some special oddities like the Great Muta, who's a member of NWO Japan. I think this would be a great opportunity to use the Japanese star on this card and give him a special spot. And another one I thought about including this, you know what? Because I thought about including Dennis Rodman as Hogan's corner man in Hogan's match later in the card, but I ultimately decided against that. It's like, put Dennis Rodman in this. Yeah, why not? Just put Dennis Rodman in as the part of the NWO team for the Battle Royal. And for the WWF side of things, again, like kind of the leftover characters that were over, but again, I couldn't quite find a good spot for, like the Acolytes or Val Venus, Godfather, the Hollies, maybe Steve Blackman, maybe Taz, but the big one on the WWF side of things is Kane. Kane, again, I think is the biggest star for the WWF that I just, for the life of me, could not think of a good match to include him in. So this Battle Royal is designed to include some of the big names from WCW and the NWO, and also give Kane a showcase and let Kane just toss bitches out. And in my mind, the match will come down to Kane and Vader, as kind of a revisiting of their feud from 1998, and Kane ultimately throws him out and wins the Battle Royal, giving Kane a big victory at WrestleMania. And next up is yet another unification match, and there's going to be a couple more of these, so strap in. For the WWF and WCW Hardcore Championships, the Hardcore legend Mick Foley comes out of retirement and defends the Hardcore title, which wouldn't be that hard to get the title on him because the 24/7 rule was still in effect, so all Foley needs to do is jump somebody backstage and pin a guy, and he gets the Hardcore title. But the ideal opponent for Mick Foley, with both Hardcore championships on the line, would be the Hardcore icon himself, the crazy-ass motherfucker, Terry Funk. And these two men are linked together in their own histories, both their work in Japan, their time in ECW, and their time in the WWF as former tag team champions in that Hardcore match they had on Monday Night Raw in 1998. One of my more favorite Raw matches during that time period. And I'm thinking, I mean, if you're going to unify the Hardcore titles, it's got to be those two. And again, I'm thinking, yes, Foley was retired at this point, but I'm thinking it's like, look, it's my card. I said everybody's available. Money's no object, all this other stuff, and I can do whatever I want. So I thought, let's do Foley and Terry Funk one last time. Let's do it. And have them unify both belts and determine a true king of hardcore. And this is where they can throw in barbed wire, they can throw in thumbtacks, and they can do whatever crazy stuff they feel comfortable doing at this point. And have like a worthy send-off for the hardcore careers for both men. I have Mick Foley winning and unifying the hardcore title. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Jim Cornette had Foley versus Funk listed as his main event of a WWF versus WCW card, which is just baffling to me. It's like, that's not... yeah, we all love Funk and we all love Foley, but the main event of a WWF WCW card? Really? That's not who my imagination goes to when I think of that. But Giving them a spot on the show, especially with the hardcore titles on the line, I have absolutely no problem with that. I say let Foley and Funk go out there, tear the house down, and be as violent as they want, with Mick Foley coming out on top. Now, this next one, I kind of had to use my imagination for a little bit. It's kind of a Legends tag team match where I wanted to get a lot of the big names on the show and develop a storyline around it. Chris Jericho, big name for the WWF at this point. Actually, on the actual WrestleMania 18, he headed into the card as the Undisputed World Champion, which didn't go too well for him, but still, he was a big star for the company and was heavily pushed. So, in my mind, in my imagination, my complete fantasy scenario, the Four Horsemen arrive in the now unified company of WWF and WCW, and in this power struggle, Ric Flair, along with Arn Anderson, who would be in his corner, and former Four Horsemen and WCW World Heavyweight Champion Jeff Jarrett returns to the WWF. They come in as a threesome, and it's like, we want a fourth horseman. And they ask Benoit, goes nowhere, because Benoit's off with the Radicals. Dean Malenko, same thing, he's off with the Radicals. But they need a fourth horseman. Steve Mongo McMichael is not available. I didn't consider Steve Mongo McMichael for this situation. But they ultimately decide to bring in a guy from the WWF's rankings, and they try to recruit Chris Jericho as a member of the Four Horsemen to help add to the WCW faction in the power struggle against the WWF. And Jericho ultimately denies them and says, I'm not doing it. And then, and this is probably where I would debut Jarrett as like the hidden horseman or something like that, the fourth horseman. Who would the horseman be? I'm thinking it would be Flair, Arn, I guess Mongo. I guess I'd have to put Mongo in a non-wrestling capacity at least. And then have Jeff Jarrett come in and fill the spot that Flair offered to Jericho. And they beat down Jericho and leave him laying. And then that leads to Chris Jericho challenging Ric Flair to a tag team match at WrestleMania, where Flair brings Jarrett, and Jericho's going to try and get revenge on both of them, but he's got a mystery partner. And the build-up to WrestleMania is, who is Chris Jericho's mystery partner? And they keep it a complete secret all the way to WrestleMania and on the day of the event. Jericho comes out for his big entrance, and there's a pause in the announcements. They don't say right away. And then, drum roll, you hear, "Oh yeah!" over the speaker system. It's Macho Man Randy Savage. And just for kicks, we can have him come out with Elizabeth too, just to kind of complete the whole ensemble. But Randy Macho Man Savage returns to the WWF, returns to WrestleMania in a tag team war with his hated rival Ric Flair. And you would probably have, I would imagine, Jericho and Jarrett carrying most of the load here, although Ric Flair was still crazy at this point, doing all sorts of stuff. With Randy kind of being the big hero on the hot tag and everything, and helping to fight off interference from the Horsemen, the other Horsemen outside of the ring, which would be Arn and Mongo. And Macho Man gets his time to shine, hits one last flying elbow drop to help set up the win for Jericho and himself. And we get this big Legends Tag Team match where Randy Savage gets a hero's return on the stage of WrestleMania. And in my imaginary scenario, Savage never goes to TNA, doesn't have that lackluster run, and this is the final match of Randy Savage's career. Let's end it on a high note. So this one was born out of, I gotta use Flair, I gotta use Jericho, and I want to do something with Macho Man. I don't know what. And ultimately, as I was putting this card together, I kind of ended up combining them all together and creating this scenario where you have the Four Horsemen storyline, and then Jericho would need a mystery partner to combat them. And then on the night of the show, you reveal it's Macho Man. That would be my idea, my concept, and give Macho Man a wonderful moment and a wonderful send-off for his career. I think it would be outstanding, especially since Jericho has cited Randy Savage as an inspiration to him, specifically the Ricky Steamboat Randy Savage match from WrestleMania 3. So it'd also be a weird kind of... Savage and Hogan both worked on the Skydome WrestleMania at 6. They both worked on the Silverdome WrestleMania at 3. And so it's kind of like a return for both the two top stars, Savage and Hogan, to an event that they made history at. And so it would be, I don't know, it was weirdly poetic, and I think a fitting end to Randy Savage's career. I would have been completely down for that. Now, as I've said before, tag teams were a big deal during the Monday Night Wars period, and never hotter than in the early 2000s for the WWF, specifically the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, and the various ladders, tables, and TLC matches that they would have together. So it was very important to me that if we're going to do a tag title unification match on the show, it has to be a ladder match of some kind, because that's what the tag team wrestling was doing at this point. So it has to be a ladder match. Maybe not a full-fledged TLC, but definitely at least a ladder match. And when I was thinking of teams that has to be in this thing, I got 4 teams, 2 from the WWF and 2 from WCW. And I was thinking, okay, obviously on the WWF side, got to have the Hardy Boys. They're the kings of the ladder match. They are the innovators of tag team wrestling in the ladder match and have to be there. And they would have Lita in their corner. Lita would get to do her key spots like she was prone to doing in various Hardy Boy matches. Go back and watch TLC 2 at WrestleMania 17. And she played as much a role in that match as any of the active participants. And so I would cook up a very similar role for her here. The second team from the WWF would be Edge and Christian, the undisputed kings of the TLC matches, as they would win all 3 major matches involving the 3 teams of the Hardys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudleys. And they would be considered heavy favorites going into this. And as their third, they would have Rhino in their corner, which they did throughout 2001. See no reason. And granted, Edge and Christian were broken up by this point, but in my imaginary scenario, never happened. Rhino was broken up from them at this point. Again, imaginary scenario, never happened. They need a heavy, and Rhino's their heavy. So you got those 2 teams. But who's going to represent the WCW side of things? Well, at the tail end of WCW's history, Starrcade 2000 featured a ladder match, a cruiserweight ladder match between the factions of 3 Count and the Jung Dragons. Now, both of these teams have 3 members, so you'd presumably have 2 members as active participants in the match, and 1 member outside acting as the third. And actually, the Jung Dragons also had Leia Meow, or Kimono Wanalea for you ECW fans. And there's something to play with there, possibly getting an interaction between Kimona and Lita as well, which would also be a revisit of ECW, interestingly enough. But you've got all of these like young guys like the Shane Helms and Shannon Moore, who are friends with the Hardys. Both of them are. Evan Courageous, Kaz Hayashi, Jimmy Yang, and who's the third Young? Oh, Jamie Noble was the third Young Dragon. And this would be a chance to showcase like the great young talents that weren't getting a lot of exposure in WCW towards the end because less people were watching. And they are 2 teams that are also bounded by ladders. So I'm thinking it's like, all right, so you've got 4 teams that are in some way connected to ladders, all tag teams. Let's just put all 4 teams together and let them unify the WWF and the WCW tag team titles in the ultimate ladder match between both companies. And just let all the men involved and even the women involved just go completely nuts and let this be a complete car wreck of a match. That is my line of thinking for this thing. So, I even considered like, it's all right, we're unifying the WWF tag titles to WCW tag titles. Let's throw in the WCW Cruiserweight tag titles, which were introduced at the tail end of the company. And maybe even, I don't know, what's a good WWF tag title thing, dude? Like the Tag Team Championship of the Universe that the Oddities had for 4 weeks, like something like that. I think the Headbangers and the Oddities were having that fight for a while. Maybe bring back the WCW United States Championships or something. Like the ultimate unification match where there's 8 fucking belts hanging from the top of the ring. Oh my god, I'm getting Russo-rific here. It's insane. But so gotta have gimmicks, bro. You gotta have belts, more belts, bro. The props, bro. But anyway, we can ignore all that last bit of insanity. The point of this match is to highlight the tag team division in the most appropriate way given the time period, and also unify the WWF and WCW tag team championships. That's the point, and provide a nice action-packed car wreck in the process. So who would ultimately win this? I think to finally get over on Edge and Christian once and for all, and to defeat WCW and get a big win on the WWF show, I would give the win to the Hardy Boys. And Team Extreme rises to the top on WrestleMania in a match type that they help make famous. Now, after such an exciting car wreck of a ladder match involving 4 tag teams and all of their extra people in their corners, Gonna need a breather. Gonna need a break from the action, much like I said in night one with the dance contest. And what was something that was popular on WWE programming during this period? Showing off the hot babes and doing a bikini contest. So yes, I am slumming it. I am being a dirty, rotten pig. And I'm showcasing the hot ladies in the ultimate bikini contest. WWF's gal, top star, top female star during the Attitude Era. I feel like that's indisputable. Say whatever you want about her. But Sable, in there representing the WWF, going up against WCW's blonde bombshell, Tori Wilson. Now, a bikini contest is something they would ultimately do in 2003, but I would do it here in 2002 with the WWF, WCW angle thrown into it for good measure. And to kind of add a little extra intrigue to this, I thought about, kind of like what I said with the dance contest where Disco and Alex Wright came out. I thought, what if they did something where like Sunny came out and cut them both down on the mic and saying this should be her spot or something like that? Or what if, trying to think of who else would get involved in this. Like some of the other girls like Ivory or Molly Holly would be denouncing the bikini contest or something like this is stupid and not representative of women, and letting them have their 2 cents in there as well. But you got the bikini contest, and once again, like the dance contest, this would be up to fan support. I would imagine that they would go with Tori Wilson because she was the newer, fresher, hotter girl at the time. So I would imagine that's where they would lean. And it gets some sex appeal on a show during a time period where they were all about sex appeal and they didn't shy away from it at all. So, yeah, I know some people don't like, perpetuating the male gaze or anything like that. But hey, this was the time period and Sable was one of the big stars. And I wanted, really the main reason for me doing this was not only to kind of get some scantily clad women on a show in a time period where that type of thing was expected, but it was also to showcase Sable and acknowledge and provide her acknowledgement of her as one of the big stars during this period. And I felt like the show would almost be, if I was going to do a WWF versus WCW Dream show, the show would almost be incomplete without Sable. So I feel like she should be included in some way. So that was the main reason for me doing this. And yeah, bikini contest. So, there's that. And okay, we are at the home stretch here. And this is a match that I cooked up out of my desire to use both men. And I kind of had to create a whole scenario that ultimately led to me putting them together in a match and crafting a whole storyline for the match that they would have. And that is the men of the initials. So you get the whole effing show, Mr. Monday Night, Rob Van Dam taking on DDP, representing WCW. Now, in my imaginary scenario, the way this would go down is that Vince McMahon would introduce Rob Van Dam as a major free agent signing in the middle of this WWF versus WCW war, and he would be called like the Secret Weapon or something like that, and would be revealed to be Rob Van Dam. And Diamond Dallas Page would come in as a WCW superstar, have feuds with other stars like The Rock, which is what he wanted, and presumably not be made to look like a complete bitch in the process, and be allowed to keep strong and actually beating people with the diamond cutter and things like that. And we get to this situation at WrestleMania where McMahon and Bischoff make a bet with each other. It's like, all right, I pick a guy, you pick a guy. They have a match, and whoever wins gets control of the Monday night show. So basically what this is a match to determine, are we going to get Monday Night Raw moving forward, or are we going to get Monday Nitro moving forward? That's the whole point of this match. And Rob Van Dam is selected by Vince, being the secret weapon. And Diamond Dallas Page, one of the guys that brought heart and soul to WCW, one of the top stars of the WCW faction in the middle of the war with the NWO, bleeds WCW. He is picked as the representative by Eric Bischoff to represent WCW and try to win to reinstate Monday Nitro and Monday nights on TNT at the time. So this is the battle for Monday night, basically. And throughout the match, I kind of envisioned like Vince and Bischoff trying to cheat, and Rob and DDP being like, no, leave us alone. We want to have a match. Screw you. And they try to keep the match fair and respectful, and ultimately like kick Bischoff and Vince to the curb, and then try to have their fair and square one-on-one match. And I think one of the reasons I settled on having these two work together was that something about Diamond Dallas Page hitting the diamond cutter on Rob Van Dam was appealing to me, because I know Rob would sell it like crazy, like he was being dropped right on his head. Like, it was almost like he would sell it almost like he's taking a pile driver, and it would look amazing. I think it would look very cool, and you get like a battle of the two cool finishers, the diamond cutter and the 5-star frog splash. In this match, obviously with that stipulation, WWF has to win. Rob Van Dam saves Monday Night Raw and gives power back to Vince McMahon in their bet, wins the bet for Vince McMahon, I should say, and gets a win over Diamond Dallas Page, but the battle ends with both men having mutual respect for each other, and presumably DDP would continue to play a big role in WWF program moving forward, again, in my imagination scenario where they didn't completely waste him. But yeah, Rob Van Dam versus DDP, that would be a pretty cool match, if I do say so myself. And now we go into the two big main events of night 2, the two biggest matches. One of them, obvious one, it's The Rock versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and it's the one match that I kept from the original WrestleMania 18 card in my whole rebooking fantasy scenario. I see no reason to change it. I see no reason to alter it in any way. Maybe in the build-up, I would obviously make some changes. I would have had Hogan not even step in the ring until WrestleMania. Once the NWO comes on board and they do the stuff with DX and other things here and there, I would have this feud with The Rock wanting and pursuing a match with Hulk Hogan, and Hogan like running away from him at every opportunity. And this is Hogan's first match back in the WWF. So they don't do any tag matches on Raw, none of that. This is Hogan's first match back in the WWF. And they have pretty much the exact same match that they had at the actual WrestleMania 18. Changed nothing. It's great. It's one of my favorite WrestleMania matches of all time, and it's one of the few true blue dream matches that we got out of the whole WCW got bought scenario. And true classic, undeniable. I wouldn't change it for the world. But now we have the main event, the final unification match, the WWF World Heavyweight Championship and the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The Broken Skull belt and the big gold belt on the line, with, as a revisiting of WrestleMania 14, Mike Tyson as the guest enforcer, to once again ensure that justice is done and there is a fair fight involved in this big-time, major, historic main event. Who are the combatants? Stone Cold Steve Austin for the WWF and Goldberg for WCW. Easy pick. I think it's the obvious match that I think people were clamoring for in 1998. The two big, bald guys in black trunks. One of them, an unstoppable rage beast that beat the hell out of everybody that came his way, and a bull that demolished everyone in his path. This would be a true battle of the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, to quote Gorilla Monsoon. And I think it's an ideal, perfect selection for a WWF versus WCW main event, given the star power involved, how big and how iconic both men were to their individual brands. It is the ideal main event for a two-night event like this that's featuring the best of the WWF and the best of WCW and all the top stars going at it against each other. So, in this scenario, how does it all go down? Well, Goldberg comes in for WCW and runs through every WWF guy that gets put in front of him. He beats Rock. He beats Kurt Angle. He beats Triple H. Even beats The Undertaker. Now that I'm thinking out loud, I'm kind of thinking, what if Goldberg beats the American Badass Undertaker, and then after Taker's beat, Sting like shows up and like looks down disapprovingly at Undertaker and says, basically saying like, this is not what I wanted. I want a match with you, but not this way and not this style of character, and that ultimately leads Undertaker to become the dead man again, but again, thinking out loud. But basically, my point is Goldberg beats everybody. And Steve Austin winds up as the WWF champion heading into this. Now, how do you address this with the Royal Rumble situation? I don't know, Goldberg wins the Royal Rumble. That's, because that would be an ideal match for him to win, because he can just toss people out left and right and just destroy everybody. Goldberg is already the WCW champion, or maybe he wins the WCW title from Booker T very early on into this revamped WCW, and then goes on to win the Royal Rumble to get a shot at the WWF title at WrestleMania 18, which is the catalyst again, I'm thinking out loud here. Once that situation presents itself, then it becomes a catalyst for WCW and WWF to unify all of the belts and creating all the unification matches throughout the card. So maybe it would work that way. But Steve Austin is viewed as the one guy left that Goldberg hasn't beat. So they get to the WrestleMania match, and Goldberg tosses Austin around like a rag doll, completely overpowers him, and just slams him around, tosses him around, and Goldberg looks like he's going to completely overpower Austin. But Austin, through sheer force of will and tenacity, is able to get some shots in, able to fight through, stomp a mud hole in Goldberg, and make that underneath big comeback, and maybe even get a low blow in there just to kind of, because Austin was not above doing that. He did it to Undertaker at SummerSlam 98. And towards the end, you get to a point where it looked like Austin might turn things around and get the win back, but Goldberg hits a spear. And it's like, oh no, it's over. Because you know what comes after the spear. And Goldberg goes for the jackhammer, but in a spot that I am completely stealing from Halloween Havoc 98, Austin fights out of the jackhammer, turns Goldberg around, kick, stunner, but Goldberg doesn't go down. He's still standing, and he walks towards Austin. Austin does it again. Kick, stunner, hits him with a second stunner, and then Goldberg finally goes down, but he kicks out at 1. And Austin's like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? I just hit him with my best shot. He kicked out at 2 stunners. And then Goldberg fights back up, tries to hit another spear, but Austin moves out of the way and he hits the goalpost or something, or maybe they do some kind of a recreation of the metal plate angle with Bret Hart where Austin puts a metal sheet down in front of himself or a steel chair in front of himself to shield himself. Something like that, and Goldberg basically just almost completely knocks himself out. And Austin gets back up, who I would have Austin blading at this point just to sell the beating from Goldberg. And then he gets up, Goldberg's down, and then he picks Goldberg back up, kick, stunner, and he's like, no, motherfucker, he's got to keep going. And then he goes, kick, stunner, that's 4 stunners. And then he's like, you know what? One more time, flips off Goldberg with the double bird, kicks, stunner, the 5th Stone Cold Stunner, lays him out. 1, 2, 3. Austin is the unified WWF and WCW champion, and WrestleMania 18 ends with the Texas Rattlesnake holding up both belts, beating his greatest challenge ever in the form of the in WWF previously undefeated Goldberg. So that is the end of my WCW versus WWF Dream Card 2-night event. Now, like I said at the beginning of this entire video, this card is completely impossible. Like, you can't do this card back then or ever. This card could have never existed. This was purely a work of my imagination running completely wild, and the whole point of this was, to have fun with it, because I think it's have fun to fantasy book and do all this other stuff, and talk about the matches that you would want to see if certain situations are presented, like WCW being sold to WWF. Like, these are the matches that were running through my head when that happened. And but like I said, this card is impossible, but the ultimate point is to highlight sometimes the imagination, or sometimes reality is never as good as the imagination. So you can picture something, you can dream about something, but it isn't always possible, and sometimes, more often than not, it's not as good as you're anticipating it's going to be. So the WWF WCW interpromotional war, nowhere near the level that I think people were expecting it to be, but given how lofty my imagination is, it's probably impossible to live up to those expectations. So that was my dream card. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. What are your WWF WCW dream matches? Post your dream fantasy cards in the comments down below. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos, and check me out and my co-host Eric Clancy on the Weekday Warriors of Wrestling. That link is in the description. And if you want to submit questions for a question and answers video for that podcast, the email address weekdaywarriors2020@gmail.com is in the description as well. But I am out. I am done. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you all later.